Trevor Phillips barked as he walked by my cubicle without waiting for my response, and his pricey cologne lingered in the air long after he vanished into his corner office. I sighed, looking at my computer's clock, which showed that it was already 6 p.m. I need the Anderson portfolio analysis on my desk by tomorrow morning. As a senior risk analyst at North Peak Financial, my days were devoted to creating models to safeguard our clients' investments, and more crucially, to safeguard the company's bottom line. My name is Ivy Carter, and I'm in Houston. And another. Late night was approaching. This request would take hours, but that's just the way things work there. I had been promised a promotion to director if I could help steer the company through what everyone knew was an impending market correction that threatened to destabilize our most profitable portfolios. I picked up my phone to cancel yet another dinner with my sister, Hey Vanessa, saying that it would be a rain check for the evening. I had spent the last 4 years at North Peak creating risk assessment models that have subtly become the foundation of our operation. Trevor just threw me another project tonight, and this is the 3rd time this month that she has said, "I know I'm disappointed, but this could be the catalyst for my promotion once I'm director." Vanessa responded last year, "Just don't let them take advantage of her." As I ended the call, the words lingered in the air. The truth is, I loved what I did. For months, I had been honing a proprietary risk assessment formula that could identify exposure to market volatility with unprecedented accuracy. I called it the Adaptive Market Vulnerability Index, AMVI. Developing mathematical models that could predict market behavior gave me a thrill that few would comprehend. For short, and it was my masterpiece. As I got comfortable for another long night, I noticed Trevor observing me through his office window. When our gazes locked, he quickly averted his gaze, but not before I noticed a startling expression on his face. 2 weeks prior, the room fell silent as I went through the calculations with the executive team. Even our normally reserved CEO, Jonathan Wells, leaned forward in his chair and said, "Impressive work, Ivy, if this performs as well as you believe it will." I had presented preliminary results from my model that showed how it predicted several market anomalies that traditional models had missed. "That's why I've been mentoring her," Trevor said, putting a hand on my shoulder and grinning tightly. "I knew she was onto something special," he informed the audience, maintaining a neutral expression, even though Trevor had done nothing of the kind. In fact, that he had questioned the viability of my strategy on multiple occasions until the initial findings were too strong to ignore. Now, as I returned to my computer, a notification showed that Trevor had sent me a calendar invite to discuss AMVI performance privately, which was set for tomorrow after the morning meeting. I felt a little uneasy as I accepted the something wasn't right, and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I needed to safeguard my job and myself before it was too late. Over the course of 3 turbulent days, the market correction struck more forcefully and quickly than anyone had predicted, sending investors into a panic. Analysts rushed to assess the damage, and meetings filled North Peak's conference rooms. Although competitors reported huge losses, something extraordinary occurred amid the chaos. The portfolios I had restructured using my AMVI model held steady, outperforming market benchmarks by astounding margins. By Friday afternoon, it was evident that my model had just saved the company tens of. "The executive team is thrilled with the performance of our risk management strategy," Trevor said, leaning back in his chair. "And I'll be briefing the board on Monday about how we navigated the correction." I had anticipated a celebration, possibly even an announcement of an immediate promotion, but instead he called me into his office and shut the door. "That's great," I said. "I've prepared a detailed report showing exactly how the AMVI model identified." "No need," Trevor answered, dismissively waving his hand. "I've already compiled everything the board needs to see." He slid a document across his desk. This is the press release that will be distributed tomorrow. I would like you to check it for any technical errors. I scanned the document, feeling sad with every word. It described North Peak's creative approach to risk assessment that had protected client assets during the market turbulence, and it gave credit to Trevor Phillips, head of risk management, for the AMVI model was developed by me as the department head, and as such, all work produced under my supervision falls under my purview. Trevor responded well, and the model was refined and implemented with my guidance and authority, but I created the core principle. My name did not appear anywhere in the document, suggesting that there was an oversight. Ivy Trevor interrupted me with a stiffening voice, saying, "You're a North Peak employee. Your work belongs to the firm, and as your supervisor, I select how it's presented to the board and the public." His smile didn't reach his eyes, but he did say, "You'll be acknowledged. Inside the department, of course. In fact, I've approved a small bonus for your contribution." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my cool because this wasn't just about credit. It was about my career trajectory. Trevor would undoubtedly get the director promotion I'd been aiming for after this victory, I realized. I put the press release back on his desk and said, "Excellent. But now I need you to explain." I explained to Trevor the technical aspects of my model, watching as he took meticulous notes that he would use to present my work as his own. As I spoke, a plan started to take shape in my mind. Trevor might think he had won, but he had forgotten one important detail about me. The stress test parameters you used, the board will have questions, and I want to be fully prepared for the next hour. Never left me unguarded. The board meeting went exactly as planned. Trevor came out of the conference room grinning triumphantly, surrounded by executives who were congratulating him. As they passed my desk, CEO Jonathan Wells paused to tell me that the risk strategy had been executed brilliantly. Trevor mentioned that you had helped with some of the technical implementation. Well done, Trevor. Trevor was promoted to Executive Director of Risk Management with immediate effect, according to a company-wide email that arrived later that afternoon. The announcement highlighted his innovative approach to market volatility and the creation of proprietary risk assessment methodologies that put North Peak ahead of the competition. Since Trevor had a history of taking credit for the work of his subordinates, which I had discovered from a former colleague who had left the company angrily after a similar experience, I had taken precautions 3 months prior to the market correction. As colleagues stopped by his office to offer congratulations, I stayed at my desk, quietly adding the finishing touches to a document I had been preparing for weeks. As per my employment contract, I worked evenings and weekends with a friend who is a patent attorney to file for trademark protection on the fundamental mathematical formula that underpinned the AMVI model. The application was meticulously crafted to encompass the unique algorithm while excluding any proprietary North Peak data or particular implementations. The general mathematical concepts I developed were not. The trademark was granted 2 weeks ago after the markets closed, and Trevor, wearing the self-satisfied expression that had become his trademark, stopped by my desk. "I wanted to personally thank you for your hard work," he said loud enough for nearby colleagues to hear. "Automatically company property only their specific application to company systems." He leaned closer and lowered his voice, saying, "You're great with numbers, Ivy, but not the ones on your paycheck." I looked up into his steady gaze and said, "Congratulations on your promotion, Trevor. You deserve everything that's coming to you." He seemed briefly perplexed by my composed manner, but soon recovered, saying, "I'm glad I'll need the Anderson portfolio measurements updated with the new risk parameters by tomorrow, and you know how things work." "Of course," I said. I'll leave everything ready for you." Trevor nodded and left without realizing that I had just stated the absolute truth. I would, in fact, leave everything ready, including the Anderson portfolio, copies of my original work, thorough documentation of the AMVI development process, and proof of the dates on which each component was created. I saved the email draft I had been writing and set it to send automatically at 9 a.m. On Monday morning, the subject line stated, "Resignation effective immediately." The attachment contained a formal notice that the registered trademark holder would need to provide appropriate authorization for any further use of the AMVI approach. Trevor was unaware of the fact that I had already set up a meeting with North Peak's biggest rival for Tuesday morning, and they were very interested in licensing my algorithm. On Monday morning, which was a cool autumn day, I entered North Peak's shiny office tower for what I knew would be the last time, nodding to the security guard as I swiped my badge. The elevator's familiar ping and the office's quiet hum suddenly felt familiar. Strange, like going back to a place I used to live. I sat down at my desk and turned on my computer for the last time at exactly 9 a.m. I had precisely timed it so that Trevor Human Resources and Jonathan Wells would automatically receive my resignation email. Trevor's newly appointed executive director's brief was always held at 9 a.m. I spent the following hour carefully removing personal belongings off my desk, being cautious not to highlight a picture of Vanessa and me at the Grand Canyon or a tiny jade plant I had kept alive, because I have to present to the senior leadership team on Mondays. A coffee mug with a joke about a mathematical formula that only other analysts ever understood vanished into my luggage every 3 years, as I methodically removed myself from the world at 8:55 a.m. After giving it one more glance, I strolled serenely to the precisely 9 a.m. I waited in the lavatory while keeping an eye on the seconds on my watch. After my phone gave me a faint vibration to signal that the automated email had been sent, I looked out to see Trevor's assistant rushing into his conference room with a worried look on her face. Even from a distance, I could see the confusion and alarm spreading across the executive team as Trevor confidently presented to them through the glass walls. A few moments later, several other executives checked their devices at the same time, and Jonathan Wells stood up abruptly to interrupt Trevor's presentation. With practiced composure, I walked to the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and walked out of North Peak Financial for the last time. I took a deep breath of the morning air and felt oddly light. My phone started buzzing with messages and calls right away, but I ignored them as I made my way to a nearby coffee shop. Trevor's face as he read whatever message had just arrived on his phone. Shop. I didn't check my messages until I was seated at a corner table with a cappuccino. I had 6 missed calls from Trevor, 4 from Human Resources, 1 from Jonathan Wells, and dozens of text messages. Trevor, why are you calling me right now? You can't trademark company property, which is grounds for legal action. Trevor, you're making a huge mistake. I calmly sipped my coffee while I watched the messages pile up. Then, I opened my email to see the official response from Human Resources. Ms. Carter, we have received your letter of resignation and the notification that goes with it about the AMVI methodology trademark. Our legal department has been notified of this and will review it right away. I had expected this response, which is why I had hired Patricia Winters, one of Houston's leading intellectual property attorneys, weeks ago. I forwarded the email to her with a reminder of your confidentiality obligations under your employment agreement. A representative will get in touch with you soon to discuss exit procedures and the serious concerns raised by your communication. The next message that caught my attention was from Jonathan Wells himself. Ivy, I'm concerned about your sudden resignation and the claims regarding AMVI ownership. I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss this directly before matters escalate further. Simple note. It's begun. Her response arrived within minutes. Proceed as planned. I'll handle any communications from their legal team. Calling my assistant. To set up a meeting for today was a surprise, because I hadn't anticipated that the CEO would get in touch with me directly. I hesitated for a moment before deciding that talking to Wells could give me important information about the company's response strategy. So I typed a thoughtful response that said, "Mr. Wells, I'm available to meet at 2 p." As I finished my coffee, my phone rang with an unknown number. When I answered, I heard a polished professional voice. "This is Elaine Brenner, the Chief Operating Officer at Veltri Dynamics. I know you have something. I'm at Patricia Winter's office today, and she will be there as my legal counsel." I entered the address and hit send. Given recent events, it would be interesting to talk with us tomorrow. However, I was wondering if you might be available today instead. The Veltri Dynamics offices were located in the top 3 floors of a modern downtown tower with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided sweeping views of Houston. Ella Brenner personally met me in the reception area, which was a strategic move that I wasn't unaware of as Veltri COO, and "Thank you for accommodating the schedule change," she said, directing me to a conference room where 3 other executives waited. The first woman to hold an executive position at the firm, she had a reputation for decisive action and strategic thinking. Recent events made our team eager to accelerate our conversation. The events she mentioned were now spreading, like wildfire throughout the financial industry. My phone had been ringing with alerts from financial news apps all morning, with headlines ranging from risk model ownership dispute rocks North Peak Financial to the more dramatic mathematical mutiny. Analyst claims ownership of market beating, and I was suspicious that someone had somehow leaked the news of my resignation and trademark claim to financial news outlets. Elaine grinned. Houston's financial community is smaller than it appears when someone develops a risk model that outperforms the market by 23% during a correction. "I appreciate your interest," I replied, placing my portfolio on the elegant conference table. "But I must admit that I'm curious how you learned about the situation so quickly." I presented the AMVI methodology to Veltri's executive team, explaining the core algorithm, demonstrating its performance during the correction, and outlining potential applications beyond the current scope. However, when that same individual then asserted independent ownership of the methodology, she raised an eyebrow. Let's just say my phone began ringing before the markets opened for the next hour. Throughout my presentation, I was careful to stick to the mathematical ideas I had developed and avoid using any proprietary North Peak data or specific implementations, just as my trademark application had been worded. When I finished, the room fell silent for a few moments, and Gregory Turner, Veltri's chief risk officer, said something impressive, but I had to ask the obvious question. How can you be sure the My Employment Agreement with North Peak specifically covers work product, created using company resources, data, or systems, which I explained, but the fundamental mathematical formula that drives AMVI was developed. I had foreseen this concern and opened my portfolio and distributed copies of a legal brief prepared by Patricia. I have time-stamped electronic records, documentation of the algorithm's development, and even witnesses who can attest to my work on the concept outside of North Peak. I paused to let them scan the brief, but more importantly, I told the patent office about the general mathematical concept before putting it into practice at North Peak. We're offering us exclusive licensing rights for the first year. Yes, I confirmed. After that, we can negotiate continued exclusivity or look into other arrangements. What are your terms? I named a figure that made one of the executives, Peak is setting a clear precedent of independent development. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises of a formal offer within 24 hours as Elaine walked away. Cough, that's significant. Elaine asked carefully, "So, is a 23% performance advantage during a market correction?" I responded, "Considering that North Peak saved about $50 million using my model, what would that kind of protection be worth to Veltry's portfolio?" As the elevator doors closed, my phone vibrated with a new message. She asked me, "I've been waiting for this. Why didn't you take this to North Peak first?" I smiled, thinking that once they realized the situation, they would have paid you appropriately. Let's just say that North Peak and I have fundamentally different ideas about what constitutes appropriate compensation and recognition. The real fight was about to start, as Jonathan Wells confirmed our 2 p.m. meeting. Patricia Winter's law office radiated calm confidence with elegant artwork, muted lighting, and furniture that suggested luxury, without being overt. While waiting for Jonathan Wells to arrive, we reviewed our plan in her private conference room. Keep in mind, Patricia warned that this is a fact-finding mission for both sides, so don't volunteer information they don't specifically request, and don't discuss your meeting with Veltry. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere despite my meticulous preparation. At precisely 2 p.m., Patricia's secretary brought in the CEO of North Peak Financial, who surprised me by arriving alone without Trevor or a legal team. I had never before directly confronted someone as strong as Jonathan Wells, so a knot of worry had grown in my gut. After introductions and courteous declines of offered refreshments, Jonathan Wells, wearing a spotless suit and holding a slim, leather portfolio, said, "Ms. Carter, thank you for agreeing to meet, and Ms. Winters, I've heard excellent things about your work." He then settled into his chair and studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. To be direct, Patricia nodded for me to reply. I developed the core AMVI algorithm independently, while I implemented it at North Peak using your resignation and trademark claim, which have created a significant situation for North Peak before our respective legal teams turn this into a protracted battle. I had no choice but to defend my interests when Trevor took full credit for my work and got promoted because of it. I listened without interjecting, then opened his portfolio and deleted a number of documents. I've also read the press release and announcement that were released. The company data and systems, as well as the underlying mathematical formula, remain my intellectual property. He paused after saying, "Sliding them across the table, it appears Trevor presented the AMVI model as his own development, with no mention of your contribution." This was unexpected, because it went against what he had previously told me in private about the model's origins. I looked at Patricia, who was still wearing a professional poker face, and asked, "Can you elaborate?" She said, Wells nodded. In our early conversations regarding the model, Trevor explained that it was a team effort, with you managing the technical elements under his strategic direction. As a result, I approved his promotion to executive director. But that's not true, I said. Trevor actively questioned the viability of my approach until the initial results were positive. He didn't contribute anything significant to the creation of AMVI Wells, so he studied me and then went for another document in his portfolio. This morning, our technical team tried to update the model parameters without your help, but they had a lot of trouble comprehending the fundamental algorithm. He looked up, and it appears that Trevor is unable to explain how the model actually functions. As the implication was resolved, there was a brief period of silence in the room before Patricia interjected, saying that although this information is enlightening, it doesn't address the core problem. My client has legitimate trademark protection. I understand that proper licensing would be necessary for North Peak to continue using the core AMVI methodology. But before we talk about licensing terms, I have another proposal for you to think about. He turned to face me directly, and I'd like to offer you the position of Executive Director of Innovation at North Peak, reporting directly to me. Include full credit for the AMVI model, a sizable compensation package, and the freedom to assemble your own team. I asked Trevor if Mr. Phillips was still employed by North Peak as of this morning, and Wells responded that he had misrepresented your work. The room felt extremely still. I had been so focused on my exit strategy that I hadn't thought about the possibility of a better position at North Peak. I appreciate the offer, which I said carefully, but there's something you should know. I've already had preliminary discussions with Veltri Dynamics about grounds for immediate termination. The following morning, financial news outlets were ablaze with headlines about North Peak appointing a new executive director of innovation risk model creator following an ownership dispute. Trevor Phillips was out at North Peak amid intellectual property controversy following tense negotiations that continued long into the night. Agreed to Jonathan Wells's offer on a number of important terms. First, North Peak would publicly recognize me as the only person who developed the AMVI methodology. Second, I would keep ownership of my personal trademark while giving North Peak exclusive implementation rights. And third, I would have total control over a newly established innovation division with a sizable budget and workforce. As I took the elevator to my new executive suite on the top floor of North Peak, I was struck by how drastically the situation had changed. Trevor's old office had already been cleared of his belongings, and the breathtaking view of downtown Houston spread out in front of me as I put my bag down and sat down behind the large desk. I was just thinking, your first executive meeting starts in 15 minutes. When Melissa, my assistant, said, and Mr. Wells asked me to deliver this personally. She handed me an envelope and quietly withdrew inside, where I discovered I'm glad we've kept your skills at North Peak and look forward to your leadership. Beneath the handwritten note from the CEO, Ivy, was a draft press release for my approval with the headline, North Peak Financial. Your honesty and outstanding work deserve this recognition, and I apologize for not realizing it sooner. Elevates market-beating AMVI technique creator Ivy Carter to Executive Director of Innovation. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number as I was getting ready for my first executive meeting. Congratulations on the promotion. I always knew you were meant for greatness. 6 months later, I stood at a podium in the North Peak Conference Center, speaking to a group of financial journalists and industry analysts. Behind me, a large screen showed performance metrics of the expanded AMVI system I had developed. Trevor, I smiled, erased the message without replying, and went to the conference room where the executive team was waiting for me. Moving on to the next slide, I described how the financial sector has historically relied on reactive risk management with my new team. The AMVI 2.0 framework represents a paradigm shift toward predictive analytics, identifying vulnerability patterns weeks before traditional indicators show cause for concern. The presentation continued with examples of how our improved. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, followed by a flurry of questions that demonstrated genuine interest in the methodology I'd developed. Later, as attendees worked over refreshments, Jonathan Wells arrived with a woman I instantly recognized, Ela Brenner from Veltri Dynamics, who said, "Excellent presentation, Ivy." "I think you know, Elaine," Wells responded. Noting the irony of the situation, I shook her hand. Circumstance. "We've met." Elaine answered, "Monsieur Carter," grinning professionally. "Excellent work, but I must admit that I was let down when our licensing negotiations occasionally fell through. Things turned out differently than I had anticipated, so I politely responded." We gazed at each other. "Elaine and I have been talking about a possible strategic alliance between North Peak and, given your background, Veltri, I figured you might be able to share some ideas." As the discussion went on, I considered how fully the tables I had been getting ready to assist Veltri in competing against North Peak 6 months prior, and now I was talking about how the companies. Later that night, I might work with my innovation division at the hub of the possible alliance. As I was leaving the workplace, I got a financial news alert on my phone that said, "A major step down from his previous position. Trevor Phillips was employed as a junior risk analyst at a tiny regional firm." As I made my way home from my executive position at North Peak, I couldn't help but smile. The ideal symmetry of justice facilitated my transformation from an underappreciated analyst to I learned the most important lesson of my career from an executive in the banking industry, which is the most potent asset. Possessing your intellectual capital and knowing when to use it is not about having money or contacts.